So I want you to know I don't always side with Pastor John MacArthur on different issues and things that he says. So you may not want to subscribe to this channel if you're expecting me to always say whatever John MacArthur says I think is great, because I will at times disagree with him. I do have criticisms at times. So if you are bothered by that, I've noticed some people will subscribe to my channel thinking, oh, this guy's really a John MacArthur fan, and then sometimes they're very disappointed because I do have critiques at times, although I do respect him as a very good expositor, Bible teacher, and faithful minister for many years. In this video, I am going to defend him a little bit because he just came out with his update, or his team's update of the NASB, called the Legacy Standard Bible. So it's basically the Master's Seminary revision of the New American Standard Bible that's meant to be a legacy. And people are criticizing for various reasons. I've noticed on the channel comments on my videos, a lot of people are criticizing from the standpoint of those who support the King James Version versus new, modern, contemporary versions. And they're critical of Pastor MacArthur for adding to the contemporary versions that are out there, contemporary Bible translations, versus the King James Version. So I've noticed, for whatever reason, my videos on the Legacy Standard Bible are reaching those who are very much in support of the King James Version. Perhaps there are many even that are King James onlyists. And I do want to say off the bat too that I myself, though I came from a King James only background essentially, I myself am not a KJV onlyist. But one of the things Pastor MacArthur said when he was introducing the Legacy Standard Bible recently, talking about how it is now out in a printed edition, available in its completion, he said,
"This is the best translation the English language has ever seen."
The LSB is, according to him, the best translation that the English language has ever seen. And that did rub some people the wrong way. There is this translation called the King James Version that has been around for a little while and has been somewhat widely accepted in Christian English-speaking parts of the world. So yeah, a lot of people didn't like the fact that he said that he put it that way. I took it as he's really just promoting his translation. It is kind of how he emotionally feels about it because he's proud of the work that his team did. And obviously it fits with his translation philosophy and his view of textual criticism, I guess you could say too. So all in all, because he's always loved the New American Standard Bible, and this is essentially kind of like his update of the New American Standard, of course he's going to say from his perspective it's the best translation that the English language has ever seen. But I really don't think we want to take that too literally, ironically. I really think he was just expressing kind of a heartfelt sentiment there. But I understand why people take issue with statements like that. And as a matter of fact, I want to go on record as saying that I believe personally that the King James Version is, in fact, the best translation that the English language has ever seen. I will say that I do think hands down you can say, because of its beauty, because of its heritage, because of the influence it has had in the English-speaking world, that the King James Version is in fact the best translation that our language has ever seen historically. Now, I know that will make a lot of King James fans very happy to hear me say that, but I want to add something to that maybe some people are not going to like, and that is that I do not think that the King James Version is the best translation for common use today. And this is where I'm going to defend Pastor MacArthur a little bit. I know that people historically have a great respect and fondness and even theological convictions about the King James Version, but I think for many reasons the King James Version is not the best translation for common use today. I know there are still a segment of people who would disagree with that, although by and large, many English-speaking Christians now have come to adopt other translations in their primary usage, which I think is a good trend because overall, the point of a translation is for us to have understanding of the Scriptures, for us to understand what the biblical writers are conveying. And there are some really solid modern Bible translations that help us to understand what the writers are saying. And I think that the Legacy Standard Bible is one of those translations. It's a very good translation and quite clear, certainly clearer to most readers today than the King James Version is. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of pushback on this, again, because people have such strong feelings in some cases about the King James Version. And I've talked about it quite a bit on my channel. You can check out other videos I've done. But one of the issues with the King James Version, and I'm going to echo a person that I really respect, a scholar that I think has done a great job talking about this. His name is Mark Ward, and I always encourage people to check out his channel, as well as a book that he produced called Authorized: The Use and Misuse of the King James Bible. It's a really excellent book, and I think it's a must-read when dealing with this issue, because it really helps us to see something important, and there are a lot of reasons I would say that the King James Version isn't the best translation for common use today. But one reason that he points out that I think is just really important to understand is the issue of what he calls false friends. And false friends, in case you haven't heard of this idea before, is the idea that there are certain words that you think you understand what they mean because you speak English, and so when you read that in the King James Version, you say, oh, okay, I know what that word means. But in fact, you don't actually understand what the word means because the word has changed meaning over time, and you don't even realize that when you're reading the King James Version, that you're misunderstanding what it says. So the problem is that, of course, people will say, if you read the King James Version and you don't understand a word, all you have to do is look it up. And yeah, point taken, you can do that if there's a word that you don't know what it means. But if there's a word that you think you know what it means, then you don't even know you need to look it up because you already think you understand what it's saying. And those are false friends. They're words that you think you know what they mean, but you don't really know what they mean, and so you end up misunderstanding them. Or in the words of Inigo Montoya in The Princess Bride, I do not think that word means what you think it means. That happens a lot with people when they're reading older English, or I think they put it as early modern English in the case of the King James Version. Point being, when you read the King James Version, there are a lot of false friends. There are a lot of things that you read that people think, I know what this is saying, but they're actually misunderstanding it. So that's a really big reason, among many others, that I think the King James isn't the best translation for the average everyday person today. Another thing that I will add to that, though, is that the King James translators themselves obviously didn't think that it was wrong to update the Bible or to have a contemporary updated translation for their time, because that's in fact what they were doing. They were taking previous translations and they were saying, hey, let's take what's already been done and make it even better for our time. So the King James translators were fine with updating and having a newer translation. So it's kind of odd that people who are very strong about using the King James are actually doing something that the King James translators wouldn't even approve of. They're saying, hey, we need to keep this one translation and not use anything else and never update it, when in fact the King James translators themselves were updating and believed that you should have contemporary translations. And again, getting back to our subject of the King James Version in relationship to the Legacy Standard Bible, the Legacy Standard Bible is really a present-day translation. And I think the King James translators would say, in and of itself, that's a good thing, that there are scholars who are working to make sure that the language really speaks to the people of our present time in a very clear way so that they understand what the biblical writers are actually saying. That's what the King James translators would want. One other thing, though, that is always brought up when you're talking about these issues, and I know some of you think it all the time and you're wanting to say it, And you're probably going to even put it in the comments. And if we do have discussion in the comments, I always say make sure that you keep it constructive and helpful and edifying. Otherwise, I have to, yes, in some cases, delete comments if they're becoming very volatile or derogatory, or if it's just breaking down the conversation instead of helping there to be actually edifying conversation. And if it gets bad enough, I would even have to turn the comment section off. But I'm talking about the issue of the Textus Receptus versus the critical text, which I have talked about on my channel before. And so I would encourage you to check out that video so you can kind of see some of my thoughts on that issue. But what I really want to say here is that even though King James only people raise that issue a lot, I really think for most of them that is not the issue that they claim it to be. And what I mean by that is, if it were really the primary issue for them, then they would really be okay with any translation that uses the Textus Receptus in the New Testament. But what happens is, even if you give them a version that does that, like the New King James Version or the Modern English Version, they still reject it often and say, no, it's still not good enough because it's not the King James Version. So fundamentally, where they're really coming from, what they really care about is whether or not you hold to the King James Version and you believe that that is the only true representation of God's Word. So I would say when it comes to the Textus Receptus issue, it's not really the issue that people make it on the surface, not only because it's not always genuine that that's really the issue for them. If you say, okay, well, what about the New King James Version? That still has Textus Receptus readings in it. They'll still say, oh, no, I still don't think you should use that. So if that's where someone's coming from, I think that's just a whole side issue. Also, I do want to say this about the Textus Receptus, that we have to realize there's more to it than some people will say, because even the Textus Receptus itself is a collection of different Greek manuscripts that were analyzed and put into a volume, and that was done first off in the 1500s by Erasmus, but it's been updated since then. And so in reality, you even have different editions of the Textus Receptus. And so you do get into this issue of, well, which Textus Receptus are you even referring to when you say that you only hold to the Textus Receptus? I know there are going to be pushback and answers to that, but the point being that you can't just overly simplify the issue by saying you can only use the Textus Receptus. Again, I would point to Mark Ward. He's talked about this on his channel. You can check out some really good stuff on his channel, even about the Textus Receptus. Recently, he did a presentation on that. I really encourage you to check that out. Also, one of my friends, another YouTuber who I've interacted with, I've been on his channel, he's been on my channel, is Dwayne Green. And he did a video recently talking about how the Textus Receptus and which Textus Receptus, that whole issue, is actually a bigger issue than he even expected. And he's not trying to be critical of the Textus Receptus. I think he's very open to those who support the Textus Receptus. But I think it just shows that that's not really the fundamental issue. There's really more to it. But I do understand where people are coming from on this issue, because it's very personal to a lot of people, and they do have their own theological standpoint. But I hope that I've made clear why I personally don't think that the King James Version is the best translation for common use today, even though I would say historically that the King James Version is the best translation that the English language has ever seen. But all in all, I think it's good to have translations that speak very clearly to people today. That's really the point I've been making here. And the Legacy Bible fits that category. It is a good translation. It's faithful. It's very accurate. And it speaks well, I think, to people today by and large. I do plan in an upcoming video to talk about some things that I really like about the Legacy Standard Bible, but also there are some things that I do want to criticize about the Legacy Standard Bible. I think really there are some good things, but also some things that I might say aren't my favorite things about it. So stay tuned for that video, but I just wanted to share some of my thoughts here on this issue of the Legacy Standard Bible versus the King James Version and the criticism from that side of things, and just address some of the people that are criticizing or naysayers of what Pastor MacArthur has produced here. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. Feel free to leave those in the comments section below. But thank you so much for taking some time to listen to my thoughts on this, brought to you from A Frisch Perspective.